And welcome to the Jamaican Canadian Association's Talk Tuesday series. This is a very special one because I have some of the JCA stalwarts, trailblazers, founding members, people who have been instrumental in ensuring that the Jamaican Canadian Association have a legacy after 58 years in existence. My name is Adaoma Patterson, and I'm the current president of the Jamaican Canadian Association. And so pleased to be hosting and moderating this Talk Tuesday session with Mr. Roy Williams, Dr. Vincent Conville, Miss Eunice Graham, and Ms. Irma Collins. So we will get right to it. You will get to know these four individuals, their perspectives on the Jamaican Canadian Association, how they got involved, why they got involved, more importantly, why after all these years they are still involved, and then where the community is. You know, how far have we come since 1962? So welcome Roy, Vincent, Irma, and Eunice to our Talk Tuesday. And so let's get right to it. And I'm going with Roy. Mr. Roy Williams, who he will tell you, but he is the, tell us a little bit about, you know, how you got involved in the JCA.
Well, back in 1962, those few Jamaicans who were around then were quite excited about the fact that Jamaica was going to become an independent country and was going to put the shackles of colonialism behind it. And we were inspired to have a celebration of that event. There was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Ricketts. I don't know how he got here, but he had been here for a while. He had been in the armed forces, served with the armed forces. He was a musician. He's taught music to as many Black people as possible in Toronto. And he was the one who inspired us. He says, we have to have a function. And as a result of that, we gathered a little group together to plan a function to celebrate Jamaica's independence in 1962. Some of the people who were involved was Amy Nelson, the two Carters, Byron and Violet Carter, Bromley Armstrong, and some others. We formed a committee and we put the party together. It was held at the King Edward Hotel in King Street East. And by the way, that was the first time that the King Edward Hotel or any public hotel had rented space to people of color. But we had a great party. We were very excited. We went all over and sold tickets all over the place. And we were able to pretty much fill the ballroom and had a party to celebrate Jamaica's independence in 1962. As a consequence of that party and people's feeling so good about Jamaica's independence and a function that brought a number of Jamaicans together for the first time, they said, we should not end here. We should take this thing further. We should form an association. We should have, it was such fun to have a social contact with the number of Jamaicans who were here at the time. And they felt that they should not be separated thereafter. They should form a group and stay together. And that's how the whole idea of an association came about as a result of the emergence of Jamaica as an independent country.
Fantastic. Jamaicans took over the King Edward Hotel in 1962. That must have been something and shocking to probably some people at that time.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Irma
Yes.
Irma Collins, tell us about your journey, your connection to the, and what was that like?
Well, I joined several years after the beginning. I've been a member for 50 non-stop years. So I joined in 1970. I was fairly new to the country, to Toronto, and was sort of flailing about, wondering where I'm going to find friends. And one friend that I'd been introduced to, Dr. Doyley, told me that there was a Jamaican Canadian Association. So I went, there wasn't any internet then, but I sort of inquired around and found a contact and put in my application and became a member. And since then, I've been a member. Are you there, Adaoma?
Yes, I can hear you. You ended up where? Before?
You're talking to Irma?
Have I lost you, Irma?
No, I'm here. What was your question?
My question was, I was talking about the connection we had. So when you first arrived in Canada, where was the first place that you lived?
The first place I went.
Before you got to Toronto. Yes.
Oh,
before you came to Toronto, where were you?
I was 3 years in Winnipeg as a student from 1963 to 63. I went home to Jamaica for a couple of years and I immigrated. So I came here in 1965 and joined the JCA in 1970.
Cool. And so I was born in Winnipeg, to Winnipeg.
Yeah, Winnipeg was where I went to university.
Yes. Right. Dr. Conville, Vincent Conville.
Yes.
How are you, sir?
I'm here.
Talk to us about
8. I didn't know anybody here. I was lonely. And I think I was coming from the barber shop at Bathurst, a little north of Bloor. And as I got to the subway, I saw this lovely young lady, and you didn't see many of them around at the time. And it was Pam Powell.
Ah.
So I went and I introduced myself to her. And by the way, not very many of them will answer you those days.
Wow.
What?
And
I don't believe that.
And then Pam told me, she's a very good salesperson. And she told me about this independence dance that they were going to have at Casaloma. And so she asked me if I was interested and if I would buy a ticket. So I told her I was here alone, if she can get me a partner. And she said, well, there are lots of single women who are always at these places. So I bought the ticket and I got to Casaloma. But at the same time, she told me about this organization, Jamaican Canadian Association, and say I could become a member if I so desire, which I did. And that was the beginning of my, 52 years stint with the Jamaican Canadian Association. I've never left. And I've always been with the organization. It was very, very interesting because at my first meeting, I saw a few people there that I actually knew and didn't know that they were here.
People from Jamaica, like that you knew from Jamaica?
Yes.
From back home?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it has been my second home. As a matter of fact, sometimes I wonder if I lived there.
We know that feeling.
Yes. Now, it wasn't long after that, I think, that the Dawes Road building was set on fire, and nobody could tell why this building was burned down. And if my memory serves me correctly, some young people were having their games night or whatever they used to do there. And I understand that the people in the area did not want us there. You can remind me, Mr. Williams, it was an old Legion Hall.
It was, yes, it was an old Legion Hall on Dawes Road.
Yes, an old Legion Hall on Dawes Road. But until today, nobody could give an account of why the building was burned down.
Well, the fire marshal said it was an electrical something.
Oh, yes. Well, but I have something else about that, because when I became president of the organization, I was telling my personal lawyer about the thing, because Scarborough, the borough of Scarborough, as it was called at the time, did not give us permission to rebuild. And I was telling my lawyer about that, and he said, why didn't you come to me? But I wasn't on the...
You didn't think about that at the time?
No, I didn't think about that at the time.
Yeah.
Because he said, if the foundation was sturdy or safe, they could not have, no bylaw could have stopped us from building there. But that time, it was too late when I got that information.
Yes, good. All right, so yeah, the Dawes Road story, many people aren't aware of, and you know, unless you read Mr. Williams' book or you were around, you know, you hear that. But that was one of the things I think that people found very interesting as we start to tell the story. So Eunice Graham, how are you, my dear?
I'm good, thank you.
Tell us, when did you join the Jamaican Canadian Association? Why and why?
Okay, so I came to Canada in 1971. I first went to Ottawa for a couple of months, and then I headed to Toronto. And so I've been here since 71. So I was introduced to the Jamaican Canadian Association by my niece, Joan Grant Cummins.
Okay, right.
With the association and with the youth group. But I was here since 71, but I didn't really hear much about the association. And she came to go to university here in Ottawa. Once she finished university, she came to Toronto, and then she got involved. So I've been involved with the association for the past 34 years. I've been on numerous committees, including the Women's Committee, which was started in 1975 as an auxiliary. And then for a few years, it wasn't operated. So in 1988, we restarted the Women's Committee. And I have been a member of the Women's Committee since 1988.
Why was the Women's Committee important? Like, why was it, why did you and others feel that it was important to have a designated committee?
Well, one of the things that we noticed was that women weren't really taking care of themselves. Like they were thinking about their families, thinking about their association, not thinking about themselves. So there should be a committee that was looking at issues that affected women. And that's how we came about having that committee. And we had our first healthcare, Black healthcare that was ever held in Canada was put on by the Women's Committee in 1993.
Wow. Oh, interesting. So that leads me to a question I was thinking about, like, what are some of the things that people don't know about the Jamaican Canadian Association? And I'm interested in hearing your reflection on um, both the impact, but what might be one thing that people don't know. So think about, you know, the 58 years, think about what's happened to the community in Toronto. Is there an interesting fact or that you don't think many people know about the JCA? Vincent, can you think of something, and or it could just be, you know, an impact. What do you think the greatest impact
Well,
is, or legacy?
I know that Mr. Williams might back me up with this, but to me, one of the very important things was Jamaica's involvement in the establishment and creation of the Ontario Human Rights Commission.
Yes.
And I don't know, Roy, if you want to jump in here and tell about you and Bromley Armstrong's role in that.
Yes, well, the JCA was most famous for its advocacy activities. In those days, there was discrimination. Canada seemed to, or professed to be a country that was not non-racial and so on and so forth, but that was not true. The arriving immigrants, if we back up a little bit, Canada was not a country that was welcoming to people of color. The immigration laws actually prohibited. And therefore, a lot of advocacy had to be done around changing the immigration laws. So when I talk about advocacy, there's a whole range of advocacy issues that the Jamaican Canadian Association was involved in or with other groups. There was a gentleman from Barbados named Mr. Moore, Donald Moore, and he formed what was called the Negro Citizenship Association. And Mr. Moore and that group in the Negro Citizenship Association advocated very strongly for changing the immigration laws. Bromley Armstrong was involved in that. They actually had a deputation to Ottawa with the Minister of Immigration to change the immigration laws. And that was a constant struggle over those years to get the immigration laws changed to admit people of color. Gradually, things began to change, and there are a few by sectors. First of all, they allowed domestic workers to enter the country from the Caribbean. Then they allowed nurses to enter the country. 1955, I think, was the first Jamaican, I think she was from Barbados, that came, a nurse of color that came into the country. And then, of course, a number came in from England. Some who had immigrated to England came back to Canada, and some came directly from Jamaica. People like Miss Nelson and Pam Powell and many others came in during those days because they changed the laws. Then there were teachers that were admitted and so on. But all of these came from efforts of the Jamaican Canadian Association and initially together with the Negro Citizenship Association. Okay, the Negro Citizenship Association faded after Mr. Moore died and so on and so forth. And JCA was a prominent organization advocating for people of color. The whole issue of employment, the issue of the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And Bromley Armstrong is famously noted for the sit-ins in Blenheim, Ontario,
yes,
where they refused to serve people of color. But that was widespread until the laws were changed to allow public accommodations, non-discrimination in public accommodation. and of course the Ontario Human Rights Commission and so on, people of color were denied access.
Yeah. One of the things I think that 2020 has highlighted is the importance of these stories because they're often not taught in the education system. Many of us who were born and raised here, we don't know, right? Unless you have parents who introduced that, who shared those stories, or you have access to the books and the resources, you really don't know that there were restaurants in Ontario where Black people couldn't go. We you know, many Canadians think it's an American problem and that those things did not exist here. So I think JCA, you know, the more and more that I hear from you and others about JCA, it really is a tremendous legacy in terms of the fight for changes to policy and legislation. Irma, what would you say maybe something that people might not know about the Jamaican Canadian Association, or what would you say could be an impact, well, like one of the biggest impact or legacy of the association?
Well, in addition to what the others have said, we have always been concerned about young people. From the time I joined way back in the 1970s, we distributed brochures in Toronto schools to tell them that we were there to give extra lessons to children, Black children, who were not doing so well in the school. And I can't say that without mentioning one named Eva Smith. Mm-hmm. She was very much interested in that. And when I sort of moved on to something else, Eva continued that. And then she went into North York schools. Kamala Jean Gopi used to help her out in the North York schools. So not only were we going to the schools, we were asking them to come to us and we would help them with their lessons. And also the ones who were not in school because they were in trouble and they were in the prisons, we would also organize teams of people to visit them and to tell them how they could make themselves follow the straight and narrow when they got out of prison. Mm-hmm. There was one lady, and I forgot her last name. Her name was Bev, and she really took that on.
Bev
and
Folks.
Folks, yeah. And we had many prison visitations, and then out of that came the youth organization, not the youth organization, the Caribbean. The thing that I've been doing in the Jane Finch Center. What do we call it?
Oh, the Caribbean Youth and Family.
That's right.
Child and Family. Yes, right.
Yeah. Out of that came those kinds of programs.
Mm-hmm. Great. Eunice, how about you? See.
What can I say? No, I was like one of the latecomers because I started with the association in 1988. And of course I was introduced to the association by my niece, Joan.
Nice.
And I think one of the things that is so unique about the association is that I've been in the association for this is going to be my 33rd year. And I've never had any feeling that I'm going to leave the association. It's like a family. You're here with a family. And so when I joined in I think it was 88, I've never left. I've always been in the association in some capacity or the other. Mm-hmm. And it's like my second home. It's one of those places where you feel at home when you're there.
Yes, absolutely. And as one of the newer members, relatively newer members, I can say that certainly is true. And I think that's one of the things that impresses people when they hear like JCA is 58. Not only are we 58 years old, but there are people who've been with the organization for that entire time. And so that makes the organization unique. I think the other thing is some of the people who've come through the association have gone on to you know, big positions, served in leadership roles. And so anyone come to mind? I know Mr. Williams, you can talk about your journey to the Police Services Board. You know, maybe you also had a particular journey and trajectory as a result of connection to the JCA, or are there others that you could point to? Mr. Williams, you want to talk about the Toronto Police Services Board?
Oh, yeah.
Well, going back to the whole issue of advocacy, during the 1980s, the Liberal government came to power in Ontario, and there were a number of us who were members of the Liberal Party and were active in politics in terms of elections and so on and so forth. What's his name? Wilson, forget his last name.
Wilson Head.
Wilson Head.
No, I'm not talking about Wilson Head. I'm talking about, it'll come to my mind as I go along, but his last name was Wilson. And he was attached to the Premier's office. It was
Trevor Wilson. Trevor Wilson,
yes. Attached to the Premier's office. And a group of us were quite active in saying the public service and the boards and commissions and so on were all white, didn't represent the population that was emerging in the society. And we need to see different people and people of color within organizations, not only at the bottom of the level in organizations. So the issue of employment equity was an important issue which we fought for during the 1980s. And that led to the emergence of an employment equity law, and active efforts was made to change the complexion of boards and commissions. And we were able to get a couple of deputy ministers appointed in the Ontario government, and began to get people placed on boards and commissions. And I was placed on the board, on the Police Services Board. As a matter of fact, I was named first to the Ontario, the one where they're now, people are gathering to watch the Raptors. That's the thing over on the island. Ontario Place Board.
Oh, okay.
The Ontario Place Board. But as they were beginning to shift and they're beginning to look for people to put on different boards, they had to move me from the Ontario Place Board to the Police Services Board. Okay, let me tell you how I got on the Police Services Board. We had a meeting for the farewell lunch for the Jamaica.
Was it the consulate, the consul general?
Who was?
Not Kay.
No, not Kay.
Ozzy
Murray. So we had a luncheon. Ozzy had a luncheon for, with the chair of the Police Services Board, and they were discussing the whole issue of this commission and representation on the commission. And the chair of the board, his name escapes me right now, it'll come back, said, we can't find any black people. And the people to put on the board. So Ozzy said to him, what about Roy Williams? And I was sitting on the other side and I happened to hear the thing. Ozzy said, well, Claire Westcott. Claire Westcott was the chair of the board. And Claire said, oh yes. Well, why didn't you think of that? And of course, on the same day, Claire went back to the office and sent word to the Premier's office. And then the Premier's office called and said for me to send my resume in. And that was how my appointment made to the Police Services Board. In other words, they couldn't find Black people or people of color to put on the various boards and commissions. And, you know, people are all around them, but they can't find them. So that was my appointment to the board. Of course,
I just wanted to, so the observation that I make is, you know, so I'm hearing stories about the 60s and representation and access, the 70s, 80s, and here it is in 2020, and we have this uprising around anti-Black racism, and it is the exact same thing, that there are not enough Black people on public or private boards in positions of power. You know, and so it's interesting to hear that history, you know, during this time where it's the same thing. The stats bear witness to the fact that we're still not in a lot of spaces. Irma, do you have any reflection on, you know, are there people who have come through the association who have kind of gone on to do really big things outside of the organization? Was that a part of your kind of professional journey, your leadership journey?
I wouldn't say that I became anything special because of the organization. I was already a George Brown College professor when I joined. I got on a board after I retired, and I retired in 1998. But that was because Marianne Chambers was in government. She didn't get me on the board. She just said, why don't you send in your resume? So I sent in my resume, and I was called in for an interview. And I even learned afterwards that my interview was used to train other people in how to answer these questions. And so I got on the board for the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, and I stayed on that for about 5 years until I turned 75, and I said, that's enough.
Yeah, save the energy for the JCA.
It's time for me, it's time for me to go learn to play bridge or something like that.
We'll talk about golf in a sec. Vincent, what about you?
I got on the Ontario Freedom Foundation board.
Right.
And I spent 2 terms there. It was quite long. And I know I got on there because of my liberal connections. Ability as well, but you know, the ability was doing anything before. So I got there, and it was a real learning experience. I don't know if you'd like me to, there's something that I really don't want us to leave, and I'd like to go back to 2 things, education and immigration.
Yep, okay.
I'll start off with the immigration first, and the most recent. A number of years ago, whenever a plane comes from Jamaica or from Guyana, the immigration officers would board the plane before the passengers disembark. And they'd search them, and they'd have to show their documents and so on. And it was really, really embarrassing. And one day I said to Herman Stewart, I said, let us make an appointment to go and see the regional immigration officer, forget his name. And we made an appointment, and we went over to the airport, and there were about 6 of these lords and ladies who were sitting there. And we explained to them, and my question was, and Herman as well, what didn't you find when the people leave Jamaica to come to Canada? Because they go through rigid checking.
Yeah.
Why when they come to the airport, you have to search them again? You know, and that led to a meeting at JCA. I think Sandra Carnegie was the president, Douglas was the president at the time. And these people came and had this public meeting, and there were quite a number of citizens who came, and we have had the occasional time at the board playing since then, but that was one of the things that JCA literally stopped because of our advocacy. The other thing I'd like to mention is going back to domestic workers, as you see. The first set of domestic workers who came here was because of the work of Wilzo Isaac, Minister of Labor in Jamaica. And these domestic workers, the rules were, if the woman was coming here, she should not have had any children. And there were quite a few of these people who came who had children. And I think it was sometimes in the 70s or early 80s, some zealous immigration officers and police started searching for these women. And and say they broke the rule, they lied when they came as domestic workers. And they were sending back quite a few of them.
Yes.
And the Guardian of Ontario, and God bless him, Dudley Laws, they came to a meeting. It was 1977 because I was the president of, and they came at Castle Frank Secondary School where we were having the meeting. And they came with the Guardian of Ontario and Dudley Laws and Dudley Laws' sidekick. What was his name there again? A lawyer from Trinidad.
Roach.
And they sought the support of JCA. At that meeting, it was decided that the Guardian of Ontario decided that he was going to speak to the Minister of Labor. And to cut a long story short, the women were told, yes, you'll stay, but you have to go leave the country for a day. And so these women went to Buffalo and they were able to come back. But JCA was very instrumental in these women getting back into Canada instead of being deported, and they were here for years. So yes, we had quite a lot of influence when it come on to Black people in this society.
Yeah, great. Very much so. Eunice, I know that you have a history with the labor movement and that JCA has also had a history when you think about the Carpenters Union and even the role that they played when we moved to Arrow Road and all of the volunteer labor that they give. Any reflection just in terms of leadership in the community, anyone you think that, you know, may have come through the JCA who continues or has had a tremendous impact, or any reflection on the labor movement and unions and the connection to JCA?
You can probably.
Not really. But one person I could talk about who came through the JCA and, you know, as a youth, and that's my niece, right? So she started with the youth group, and she ended up being the first Black president of the National Action Committee on the Status of Women.
Right.
Joan Grant Cummings.
Yes.
So a lot of young people came through the association and ended up you know, doing a lot of advocacy work. And another thing that she was involved in, which is a little known thing to everyone, women's health in women's hands.
Right, yeah.
Jamaicans had a big hand in women's health in women's hands, right? Because when they were putting it together, there were all kinds of obstacles in their way. And at one point, they had a sit-in. I was involved in a sit-in with the employees of Women's Health in Women's Hands. And Joan Grant Cummings, again, she became the first director of Women's Health in Women's Hands, which is a health organization specifically set up for immigrant women, because those immigrant women weren't getting the type of health care that they should have been getting in the mainstream their settings. So that's how Women's Health in Women's Hands came about.
Yes, yes, yes. So you talk about the youth groups, and JCA had a couple of vibrant youth groups over its history, and many of them, well, they're no longer youth, of course, but you know, you think about Akwatu Kente and Paul Caselli.
Jeffers, I've forgotten his first name.
Yeah.
The one who has a science fair.
Francis. Yeah. Francis
Yeah.
Jeffer. Yeah.
Anthony Henry.
Oh, right. Okay, Anthony Henry. Yeah. So there are lots of them that I don't even know.
What's the name of? Trying to remember her name. She works on the education committee quite a long. She was one of the younger ones.
Vilma?
No.
No.
Very good friend of oh gosh, what's her name?
Okay, while you're thinking, you were asking about people who have gone on to do other things after leaving, well, as a result of their position in the JCA and so on. Carl Fuller, for example, went on to serve on the Ontario Police Services board, their investigation board, not the SIU, the OIRP, I think it was.
Oh, okay.
He served in that board. Herman Stewart.
And Carl Fuller was a president, a past president, just for people who don't know.
And first executive director of JCA.
The first executive director of the JCA Social Services. Yes. Okay.
I want to mention Herman Stewart went on to be a member of the George Brown College board. The board of the George Brown College. And of course, Kamala Jean Gopi, of course, been in so many different organizations in which she has been involved.
Absolutely. So yep. All past presidents of the Jamaican Canadian Association.
Connection with labor, which you can't forget, it's Bromley Armstrong, his long history, both with the association and with the trade union movement.
Absolutely.
And also with the trade union movement.
Yes.
Yeah,
so in thinking about, so we've talked a lot about our history and the past. Through that, you've highlighted some of the issues, the racism, the systemic discrimination that Black people are facing. So think about where we are in 2020, dealing with a pandemic, 100-year kind of thing, and all of the conversations about racism, about anti-Black racism and systemic discrimination that are taking place this year. What do you think is JCA's place in the 21st century? And what do you hope? Like, what role do you think that the JCA should continue to play, given all of the things that are happening, right? We have a diverse Jamaican and Black community. We have people who are now second generation and third generation. We have immigrants that are continuing. We have more than 200 international students from Jamaica and the Caribbean who are very much placed in Jamaica still. Their mind is, there, their family is there. So just thinking about how diverse the community is, how spread out geographically we are in the GTA, what do you see as JCA's role and place, and what do you hope for the organization going forward?
Before you go there, Madam Chair, let me just say one more thing about education. The JCA played a major role in changing the education system in the various boards of education, starting with the North York Board and the Toronto Board and so on. We served on many committees, and the whole issue of anti-racism and multiculturalism. Yet the children that used to come from Jamaica and the other Caribbean islands, they talk about streaming. They were usually placed in grades way below what they were already qualified.
Yep.
And a whole lot of work had to be done by JCA. You have Eva Smith and
Monica Marsh,
Dr. Conville and Kamala Jean Gopi and many others. Some of them were teachers and they were witnessing what was happening to the children in the system. Mm-hmm. And they collaborated to help to change the system. The whole issue of the Saturday morning program that was conducted by Eva Smith and some others was an attempt to change, to level the playing field for the children because they were so held back by the system. Teachers couldn't understand their speech. And because of that, they thought they were ignorant and
the accent
and so on.
Yes, yes.
That's a big, big area that the JCA was involved in. And many of our teachers volunteered to give extra lessons to those children and to introduce the summer program. The summer program, it was started in North York as a makeup system and then copied by the Toronto Board of Education and so on. Vincent can talk more to that.
But before we go, I'm going to ask.
But the hour is almost over.
Yes. Irma, you have to say something about your workshop or workshops on equity in education.
Yeah,
well, I don't. You say it because I don't remember the details, but I know I had several workshops when I was chair of the board of it. What am I saying? When I was chairperson
of the education committee.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope I can find some of the documents from there. Anyway, when it comes,
I remember one where we had the Minister of Education. I think his name was Philippe or something. Can't remember. And what struck me about that wasn't that about 100 or more people turned out, was that we had all kinds of people who were there to hassle us. And I'm not going to go into that.
Was it Mary Thompson Collegiate?
No, we had it at DuPont Street. That one I'm talking about. Yeah.
Anyhow, briefly, when we talk about something the young people today should know, there were the days, it didn't matter what part of the world you came from and you were Black.
Everybody was Jamaican.
Yes, and you were placed at least 2 grades, 1 or 2 grades below your grade level.
Yes, that happened to me.
And
what happened to you?
Yes, that happened to me, yeah.
And a lot of them used to be in the Toronto area, used to be sent to LSBT and Castle Frank level 4 secondary schools. And that was where Eva Smith also and the Jamaican Canadian Association came in. And out of that came the LEAP program, language
enrichment,
academic education program, something like that. And it reached a stage where JCA was able to get North York Board to employ people to run some of these LEAP programs. And that's that's where the summer school programs started in the metro area until they finally took it over.
Right.
And these were all JCA work.
So we what you're saying to me is that we need to do a part 2, and we will. As a matter of fact, it should really be an ongoing thing because there's just so much. We haven't even talked about the economic impact that the Jamaican Canadian Association has had on the Black community and Toronto. Like, we didn't even get into the credit union because I know we need a full hour to talk about the credit union, but to talk about the idea and the importance of ownership. JCA has always owned its buildings or moved towards owning its buildings and property. The Marcus Garvey chair. So there's lots more to talk about. I want to, just in the interest of time, just have you reflect, briefly on, so given everything that's happening in 2020, where do you see JCA going? What do you see as the role for the organization going forward? Who wants to start? Eunice, do you want to start?
Sure. I could see the JCA has to be continually involved in advocacy. That's where we started, and we have to continue because this is not going to go away.
Yes.
So we need to continue the advocacy work that we've been over the past 58 years.
Absolutely. Vincent?
We have to continue to assist, help the youth, because, you know, as my son used to say, when his friends in certain area of the city got into trouble, nobody heard about them. And he was saying, because they had relatives who were lawyers and friends who were lawyers, and their names never got onto there were some of these people young people who were caught those days when marijuana was not
A crime.
crime. Those kids, if you look on the dockets, you wouldn't find their names there, I bet you. But as my son used to say, the black youth had very few advocates,
Yes.
especially when it come on to the justice system. So we have to continue to monitor what is happening to our young people.
Yes.
You know, and they are not as bad as people make them out to be.
Yeah.
And
all right. May I say something now?
Yeah.
Yes, and then we'll end with Mr. Williams and I'll summarize. Go ahead, Irma.
I think that those of us who were there in 1962 and the early years, we are getting old.
Yeah.
We have to do something for the old people as well, although I'm not sure what that will be. I think somebody has to say build a nursing home or a seniors residence for our kind of people. Maybe that's too big a dream, but I would love to see that come to fruition.
Yes, and I have heard that. And I think, you know, you're right. You're right. We can't say anything is too big, right? Once you say it, you bring it to life.
Adaoma, talk to me about that. There's something I want to tell you about that.
Okay, we'll let you say. Well, you have to save that for part 2. You see, this is a teaser, Vincent. You want people to come back. And Mr. Williams, your final thoughts and observations.
Okay, just about the housing. That was in the plan, and it got broke down when Bob Ray's government was turned out and Harris' government came in. That was on the book.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, yes.
What I want to say is this. Mel Thompson. Mel Thompson should never be because when the lean years of the JCA, when we were in the wilderness, so to speak, Mel Thompson stayed with the ship. Mel Thompson stayed as president of this association when things were lean. And we should never forget Mel Thompson.
And Amy Nelson.
Yes.
Do not forget her.
So
I think of Bromley Armstrong as not to be forgotten.
Yeah.
He was the one who fought, really had to fight first to get our first building, which was the cornerstone of all other buildings. Bromley Armstrong.
So we want to be able to say those names. We want young people to know those names. I'm told that Miss Amy turns 100 this year. There's a, you know, whether we're 2 years ahead or not. And so we have thought about making sure we celebrate her. You saw her. You may have seen her on the CBC newscast, being featured with singer Julie Black. So we certainly remember and appreciate Miss Amy. So, you know, I've heard a couple of things. I've heard the importance of hearing from you, hearing your history through your perspective and your eyes. I've heard the importance and the important role that the Jamaican Canadian Association has played in addressing education and policing, immigration, equity, housing, access. And I've heard that the struggle continues, that the struggle started, of course, before 1962. And it's still a struggle, and that JCA cannot let up. JCA and the community can't let up, because while we have made progress, we still have lots of work to do. And so I just want to thank you, each of you, Irma Collins and Roy Williams, Vincent Conville, and Eunice Graham for the role that you have played, for the work you have done, and for telling the story. The telling of the story, and now we have video to do that, right? So where people don't necessarily want to pick up a book, they have the option of hearing this story on social media. And so I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you for taking the time to join us for the Talk Tuesday series of the Jamaican Canadian Association. And we continue to just love and appreciate all of you for the role and the contribution that you have made.
And thank you, Adaoma, for arranging this.
Yeah.
Very kind of you. Yeah.
And thank you to our millennial who came up with the idea.
and to Kasheen.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is the brainchild of our very young, youthful communications team. And so big up to them, respect.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah.
All right. And with that, we sign off and we say thank you again. Have a wonderful day, guys.
You too. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.